You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to break down some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Representatives Brian King and Dan McKay. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for being here.
Bet.
We have one gloating and one wishing he wasn't here this morning. Let's start off with the Mueller investigation. Verdict coming down against Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, pleading guilty. We're talking the president's former lawyer and campaign manager. Brian, let's go ahead and start with you.
Well, it's significant and important because, of course, the president has been saying this has nothing to do with him, both for Manafort and Cohen, and he's been distancing himself from both of them. But when Cohen enters a guilty plea saying that he conspired with the president, basically, to pay hush money to these two women, he's bringing it home pretty directly and saying, I conspired with, at that time, candidate for president of the United States. And I think it's pretty clear that what we're dealing with is it's more and more evident that we've got a serial philanderer, liar, and thief in the position of the White House. And if these things had happened under Richard Nixon, and of course bad things did happen under Richard Nixon that weren't as bad as these, and he left office in disgrace over that. I think this situation that we've got with the president right now is a character test, not just for him, of course, which he's failing. It's a character test for elected Republicans and for the Republican Party generally. And so far, I don't think they're doing well.
That's what I want to bring you in on and have you respond to that. What does it say about the president and the Republican Party standing behind him?
The Democrats lost an election back in 2016. I don't know if anybody remembers that. And Brian and his ilk want to relitigate this over and over and over again. None of the money, look, I don't want to get into the details. What I will say is we can all do better, everybody. I don't think there is one person in society who is not flawed and doesn't want to show themselves in the best possible light. I would just say, let's stop doing dumb stuff like this.
Well, when you do take a look and see people all around him pleading guilty or being charged, being convicted, do you start to say, yeah, maybe he could potentially face that same fate?
You're not going to let me get away with, let's just do better?
Thank you. Thank you for not letting him get away with, let's just do better.
We have too much time to fill on this Sunday morning. I can't let you just get away with it.
You know, the president has, his campaign had issues all throughout. And I will say, I don't think I heard the president ever once during his campaign talk about how he'd been faithful in every one of his marriages. I don't think that you'd ever heard anybody talk about, you know, that he hadn't done any of the things he's been accused of, as far as, you know, having extramarital relationships. That said, he still got elected, defying all of our logic as to what we thought the American people wanted for a president. That said, what I love is that the Democrats want to consistently talk about violations of campaign law and, you know, campaign finance problems, etc. And at the same time, they want to avoid their key issues because they know they are all losers. The American people want nothing to do with the Democratic agenda, and so what are they trying to do? They're trying to distract and dissuade. And it's not going to be effective. It's going to show at the end of the day, this is going to be a flash in the pan and move on.
To that point, are Democrats doing anything different this time around that could sway over the American people?
No, I think it's very important. I think that in this sense, Dan raised a good point, and that is you've got to have something that's relevant to people on the ground in the state of Utah. And I think that we do as Democrats. We're talking about things such as Trump's EPA wants to loosen clean air standards and prohibit us in Utah from cleaning up our air. He wants to
prohibit seems strong.
No,
right?
Well, no. He wants
Especially
to,
when you have articles this last week of
major
companies.
You're not supposed to interrupt me like that.
I'm sorry. On this show, I have to give him equal time.
He wants to
really
take our public lands and have them developed despite promises from local officials and our congressional delegation that wasn't going to happen. These are not things that Utahns want to see. They're not in keeping with Utah values. The corruption that we see, wholesale corruption by the president and the people closest to him. You talk about drain the swamp. He's added to the swamp in a significant way. It's not what Utah values are. So to address that point about what is relevant about all this to Utah, all those things are relevant.
Do you fundamentally understand Utah and what Utah wants?
I think so.
You think the government, you think Utah wants government incursion into everything.
I
and
think
just
they
telling
want
people
clean
what to
air.
do.
I think they want clean air.
I don't
I
think
think they want their
disagree.
kids educated. I
The
think they
number
want a
one
better
thing they're
economy.
asking for when they go to car lots is they want cleaner cars. You got all the manufacturers here in the state of Utah who are all voluntarily
And Trump's
before
EPA
federal
wants to
mandates working
loosen,
forward.
wants to make those clean air
And
standards
all of our local
lower.
corporations have all said, regardless of what happens at the federal level, we want to make these decisions because they're the right thing to do. I personally think the market is making wise decisions, and I think you'll continue to see those wise decisions being made.
Well, I don't know who's putting pressure on the Trump administration to go in the other direction, but they are. And I think it's people with money in the market, big players who say, we want you to loosen those clean air standards in a way that damages the quality of air across the West.
All right, I'm just going to kind of be over here in case you guys ever want to let me in on this. No, I'm going to stop right there because I want to get to some other issues.
Letting Brian go on just drives me crazy.
Honestly, I enjoyed watching you guys go on right there. But let's move on to our schools now. They officially launched their campaign over the week. I'm glad we have the two of you here together this week because you voted no against our schools now and you voted yes.
Right.
Why shouldn't voters approve this question?
Well, I think this is a different question, right? The question I had before me was, should we put this on the ballot and should we increase property and other taxes in the state level? I was not against that at that time. Now that there's
Are you against the gas tax increase?
Yeah, I don't think the gas tax itself is proven, and we've seen this at the legislative level, that it's a constantly failing tax. It doesn't cover what it's supposed to, one. But two, we're going to generate $163 million out of this new gas tax, and there is nothing that stops that money from going one direction or another and not being spent on education. So long term, there's no assurances for the public that this money is going to be spent on education. It's a finite amount, and we see that it's constantly diminishing in its effect and increase. So as a result, it's an impact with no benefit. And that's why I've said there needs to be better ways to do this, right? And sadly, we left open, and I think this was a real mistake, but we left open a trap door in our financial process that allows the legislature, and this was something that people amended the Constitution to do, that allows the legislature to take money from the general fund, or sorry, from the income tax revenue that is for education, and put it into higher education. And by doing that, it created this gray zone for money. And we can take money out of higher ed, and we can put it into roads, and then we can take money out of higher ed and put it into general education. That's a little wonky, but just what you realize is there's a slush fund in the middle. And as long as that door is open, there's going to be a problem in that appropriations process and no guarantee that the money stays in education. I'm hopeful that if the public passes it, that the legislature will decide to keep it that way.
Here's the big picture. McKay and I aren't thrilled about voting to raise anybody's taxes. That's the nature of elected officials.
You look so shocked.
I've never seen you not vote for a tax increase.
Oh, please. So it's hard to get elected officials, especially people who are conservatives like McKay, to ever think about raising taxes because, you know, elections matter and we have voters a lot of voters say, I don't want my taxes raised. The purpose and the reason that this initiative is important, this ballot question is important, is that if you have Utahns say, yes, we're willing to say that, it makes it a lot more likely that legislators like McKay and I in the future are going to say, okay, we'll feel comfortable doing it in some form, whether it's the fuel tax or the sales tax, the income tax. We'll have a sense that the people of Utah support it when it's talking about educating our kids, when it's going to our kids. If they say no, and this is the risk that's being run here by putting this on the ballot at all, if you see that go down, I guarantee you it's going to be very, very difficult for any elected official to say, despite what the voters said, we want to raise your taxes.
If they do say yes, does that put pressure on your shoulders?
I think what you're going to find is that the results will be largely regional, that will already reflect what the representatives and the senators and the legislature already feel about tax increases. So I think there's a chance that it will pass the vote in November, and then it will come down to, I think, most people are going to look at how did this perform in my individual district. And my bet, it will do very well in urban Salt Lake City and maybe in the surrounding 5 miles. And beyond that, it will fail. And I think for that reason, because of the influence, the way that the outside regions have in the legislature, I just can't imagine that it would pass even then. I could be wrong.
All right. I'm going to have to end it
I
on
was
that.
once before.
No, I don't think so.
All right. Great conversation. I seriously just kind of sat back and let you guys take
Sorry
it.
about
But hey, If it works, it works, right? Appreciate
Thank
having
you.
you guys here. And
Thank
I'm
you.
glad you didn't call in sick today. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
All right. We'll be right back. Stay with us.